So what is sexual communication? Sexual communication can be described in a number of ways. More commonly, it is known as the verbal and nonverbal form of messaging and expressed behavior. It can also be defined as the conversations we have about sexuality and sexual behavior between genders. So meaning, sexual communication includes both romantic conversations and communication we may have when in a romantic relationship, as well as just simple conversations we may have with parents, teachers, etc. Facts on sexual communication. So we communicate about sexuality differently when talking to friends, coworkers, partners, family members, and health providers, mainly because it's usually a different atmosphere and we're talking about different aspects of sexuality. Verbal communication includes what we speak and really how we say it, but 90% of messaging and sexual communication is nonverbal. This includes proximity, eye contact, and touch, which are nonverbal signals really are still able to relate to a message of how we're feeling and if we're interested or not interested in an individual. According to a school-based study, 50% of youth have never discussed sexuality with their dating partner, and 29% never communicated about sex with their parents. This same study found African American students were more likely to discuss sexual health than Caucasians and Latino students. I found it really interesting that 54% of youth never talks about sexuality with dating partners, because you would think that topic would come up when speaking. But again, when you're a teen, those kinds of things to talk about can be overwhelming and have a whole bunch of emotions coming up, which we'll talk about in a later slide. Sexual communication in relation to the 3 dimensions of sexuality. So just to break them down, the first is the biological dimension, and this involves our physical appearance, sexual characteristics, our sexual stimulation, reproduction, anything that has to do with our actual physical being would be into the biological dimension. The second dimension would be the psychological dimension, and this is our attitude and feelings towards ourselves and others. This really includes our thoughts and our experiences and how this motivates us when communicating sexually. The third, about sexuality, but we're going to relate it to sexual communication. The third is social cultural dimension, and this is really a mixture of both the psychological and the biological dimension. This includes religion, ethics, and the media, and how this influences our thoughts and actions. This section can also include stereotypes and stigmas that we may hold towards others and certain appearances and such. The psychological dimension. So our emotions and attitudes towards sexual communication can stem from the psychological dimension. We often feel overwhelmed by negative emotions on what sexual communication is and how to go about it. And these kinds are kind of like a debating thing that most people have going on in their minds with their thoughts. Debating whether, how to properly go about having a healthy conversation about sexuality. So proper parent and teen communications is often hindered because of feelings of embarrassment, fear, and just parents feeling that they are just ill-equipped to have this kind of conversation with their child. These conversations often feel uncomfortable and limited, but the only thing stopping productive conversation is our own thought and dismay. So if parents are really just to have more confidence when having these discussions with their children, we might just see a real decrease in the adolescents not really being aware of what to do and what not to do. And it also might, be a time for a bonding session. As when you're more open with your parents, it's easier to communicate with them about other things as well. Also, this dimension is seen in today's dating world, as communication has evolved into more mind games and unspoken desires, as people focus less on physically being with somebody in today's dating world and more on like a quote unquote talking stage where we sit and kind of reread and analyze the texts and the messages when it's really not that needed or deep, to say the less. We allow our past experiences to delay our future relationships because we focus more on how we were hurt possibly and trying to analyze that within our minds and trying to put that past hurt onto future relationships and so on and so forth. I'm just trying to point out how we get into our own ways most of the time because of our own thoughts and such.
There are many social-cultural factors that play a role in sexual communication. Religion plays a large part in sexual communication as it also influences views on moral behavior. Thus, some religious upbringings may result in the refusal of a parent allowing their child to participate in sex ed courses or any other forms of sexual communication. Cultural influences play a dramatic role on sexual communication as well. Culture affects people's sexual communication styles, attitudes, and beliefs, which may limit or increase the level of sexual communication between a parent and their child.
The biological dimension. So biologically, sexual communication for adolescents is extremely important because we want to keep our youth informed on sexuality because this will decrease sexual health problems that we see in the youth. So the youth is at high risk for STDs and HIV, as there are 8,300 plus cases of HIV and over 9 million plus cases of STDs in adolescents, according to this school-based study. Now, you can take into consideration that these numbers may be higher today, and but promoting more positive conversations on the physical and natural reactions of the human body will decrease stereotypes and stigmas that we really often have with sexuality that we can see. And additionally, when communicating sexually, we use nonverbal communication such as body language, and so to signal if we're interested in that person. So really seeking sexual communication is completely normal and completely necessary for a healthy and proper reproduction. So just as long as we just bring more positive conversations about it and more open conversation, we will definitely see a decrease in the sexual health issues for the youth and for many others.
In regards to public health significance, sexual communication is an essential part of sexual development in adolescents. For years, lack of such education has created issues such as, among U.S. high school students surveyed in 2017, 30% had had sexual intercourse during the previous 3 months, and of these, 46% did not use a condom the last time they had sex, 14% did not use any method to prevent pregnancy, 19% had drunk alcohol or used drugs before last sexual intercourse. The Centers for Disease Control and Prevention completed another survey in 2013 of adolescents and young adults. They found that nearly half of the respondents who had had sex had never been tested for disease due to belief that they were not at risk. Clinical psychologist Cynthia Rosengard reported that many 15 to 18-year-olds identified the family as sexual health information sources. Unfortunately, many portrayed their learning experiences as negative, limited, lacking detail, and not always balanced with positive messages. The value of parental involvement in maintaining open lines of communication is well documented as a deterrent to a variety of risky behaviors and must be approached in a positive way to be effective. Research has shown that parent-child communication about sexual health can have a positive effect on teen sexual behavior. Parents can enhance their child's sense of self-worth with affirmations of closeness and acceptance in spite of the many emotional transitions puberty can bring. The topic of sexuality can seem difficult at times to discuss, but openly communicating effectively with your sexual partners can not only help create a better understanding of each other's wants, needs, and comfortability in regards to sex, but create a respectful and trustworthy environment. In regards to public health, communicating about practicing safe sex and getting tested can prevent the spread of sexually transmitted infections. It is important to know if you or your partner has an STI. Being understanding about getting tested and asking your sexual partners to get tested before you start having sex can help protect your own health and others. Today, STIs are prevalent all across the globe. Each year, there are an estimated 376 million new infections with one of 4 STIs: chlamydia, gonorrhea, syphilis, and trichomoniasis. Most STIs have no symptoms or only mild symptoms that may not be recognized as an STI. Therefore, many people are unaware of their infection and don't bother getting tested. This can lead to a continued spread of the infection to others.
Our proposed solution to increase sexual communication amongst parents and their middle school age children is to implement student parent-teacher conferences that specifically aim to promote positive sexual communication. This conference will give parents tips to talk to their children and also list the benefits of an open dialogue. Our intervention will occur during middle school's annual sex ed courses and will focus on eliminating the uncomfortableness associated with sexual communication among parents and their children. Typically, sex ed courses last for only 3 days and occur in a large classroom with multiple students and only one teacher. Thus, many students may feel uncomfortable asking certain questions at this time. So through this program, we are aiming to open up a conversation so that sexual education can occur year-round. For social media, we have chosen to implement the Remind app in our program. Many parents and students are already comfortable and have prior experience using this app, as it's a good communication device, so teachers, students, and parents can have communication on what's going on in class. Thus, we have chosen to use this app so that parents have an indispensable tool to ask questions and seek help to improve sexual communication with their children. And students will also have a tool that they can use to communicate back and forth with a sex educator.
When it comes to the personal point of view and conclusion, together we collectively agree that we did not receive the most adequate sexual education while growing up from both our families and the school system. Sexual education between us and our family members taught us the basics of sex, but as a group we agreed that it was both awkward and uncomfortable at times to discuss these topics with our parents. From each of our experiences in school, we all noticed that certain topics of how to get tested for an STI, female contraceptives, and how to appropriately express to our sexual partners our wants and needs was minimal. To conclude, we believe that sexual communication of all forms must be prioritized at all ages, as STIs, unsafe sex behaviors, and unintended pregnancy has become far too common. The topic of sex education needs to become more familiar.
While creating our PSA, we learned about the benefits of applying sexual communication in the school system, such as the fact that it promotes condom use, delays sexual initiation, and prevents the occurrence of dangerous sexual behaviors. We also increased our knowledge on different methods of communication that will open up a conversation of sexual health between parents and their children. And we also learned about different organizations aimed to improve sexual health and communication, such as Planned Parenthood and the Society for Adolescent Health and Medicine. Our group struggled with finding a solution that accommodated individuals from different cultural or religious backgrounds, and also building a program that was applicable for students that don't have a relationship with their parents. This is why we chose to use the Remind app, because the app allows for parents, teachers, and students to have group chats, and also for teachers and students to have private messaging. Thus, a student that doesn't have a good relationship with their parent, or doesn't have a relationship at all, can still have their sex educator as a constant resource privately for any questions they may have. Also, depending on your cultural background, a student may not be allowed to participate in communication with their parents. Therefore, we tried to create a program that was culturally sensitive, and this is why we also use the Remind app, because it's an effective way to increase communication with an educator and doesn't require your parent being there at all times.
Each group member was tasked with completing their assigned slides and researching information that relates to their portion. Each member had to record themselves reciting their information on a voice memo. Danica also compiled all our voicemails together and edited the video, as well as the public health significance sections. Abigail completed the overview of the sexual communication and its relation to the 3 dimensions of sexuality. Raquel completed the proposed solution and what was learned from this assignment.
The Adolescent Health and Medicine Organization promotes the optimal health and well-being of all adolescents and young adults. They do this by supporting medical professionals through advancement of clinical practice, care delivery, research, and advocacy. On the organization's website, there is a list of resources available for parents and their children for sexual and reproductive health education. The next organization that we promoted was Planned Parenthood. This is an organization with multiple resources for parents, teens, and educators. For parents, the websites contain information for children of different ages and gives tips on what parents should begin and continue talking about regarding sex health and sexual communication. And the website also lists different topics that should be discussed.